Some of the most dangerous warplanes in the world never even flew a single mission. Not because they were bad, actually, some of them were faster, more powerful, and even stealthier than their rivals. But strangely, all of them disappeared into a dark corner of history before they ever entered service. So the question is, what makes an ultramodern fighter jet, with billions of dollars in funding, years of research, and the most advanced technology, end up never taking to the skies? I mean, what factors lead to a masterpiece project getting scrapped? Is it a political decision behind the scenes, an industrial conspiracy, or just some terrible bad luck? Stick with me as we answer these questions, because today we're going to look at 5 of those fighter jets that were built but never made it into any squadrons. Alright, let's start with the Northrop YF-23, also known as the Black Widow II. In the 1980s, the US was looking for a 5th-generation stealth fighter to counter the Soviets, so 2 companies were chosen to design 2 new jets. The YF-22 from Lockheed and the YF-23 from Northrop. The YF-23 was a sleek and unique masterpiece that was strange in every way. Incredible stealth, a futuristic design, high speed. It was even faster than the YF-22. But what was its problem? The problem was that it was very complex and not that agile in terms of maneuverability. Plus, it was bigger and harder to maintain. Meanwhile, the US Air Force was looking for a more agile fighter. That is, the YF-22 could carry out both air missions, taking down enemy aircraft, and ground missions, striking ground targets. Also, the YF-22 systems were completely modular, meaning its systems were designed separately from each other, so they could be easily modified, upgraded, or replaced. So, for example, to upgrade the radar, there was no need to replace the entire aircraft. They would just upgrade that specific part. But the YF-23, even though it was faster and stealthier, wasn't multi-role or modular, and it was designed for more limited missions like rapid interception. In the end, the YF-22 was chosen and became known as the F-22 Raptor. But only 2 prototypes of the YF-23 were ever built, and they're now kept in a museum. The Boeing X-36 was one of the strangest experimental fighter projects. It was a small fighter, only about a quarter the size of a typical fighter jet. But what's even more interesting is that this fighter had no tail. You should know that when I say it had no tail, that's an important point, because the tail is one of the parts that adds both weight and air resistance, and it also makes it easier for the fighter to be detected by radar. So, compared to regular fighters, this one was lighter, faster, and more invisible. However, the tail makes it easier to control the plane in the air. So, the X-36 came with a completely different and innovative design and utilized highly advanced technologies for its precise control, such as electronic flight control, what they commonly call fly-by-wire, specialized control surfaces, and a comprehensive set of automatic flight systems. But one of the most interesting things about this fighter was that there was no pilot in the cockpit. Instead, the flights were carried out remotely, actually with a virtual cockpit on the ground. Despite all these innovations, the X-36 project never went into production. Why? Because no one took this fighter seriously. It didn't get any funding, and the project didn't continue. It just remained an interesting experiment, and the US Air Force decided to focus more on multi-role and well-known fighters. Let's move on to number 3 on our list. In the late 1950s, Canada built an interceptor fighter jet that could fly at twice the speed of sound. It even had an electronic flight control system, or fly-by-wire, which other countries only started developing 15 years later. The purpose of this fighter was to intercept Soviet bombers coming over the North Pole. At that time, the Soviets were building bombers that could fly over the North Pole, and Canada was the first line of defense for the United States. The aircraft's design was extremely aerodynamic and advanced, shaped like a large triangle, which became known as the Delta Wing because it resembled the Greek letter delta. But what happened that this aircraft also never made it to production? Well, there were several reasons. Astronomical costs. the Canadian government realized building and producing this fighter jet would be expensive. The next reason was political pressure. The United States didn't want a country like Canada to have such an advanced fighter jet, and this could also threaten America's export market. Some people even say that if this project had continued, Canada would have become a leader in the aerospace industry. Another reason was that Canada decided to turn to defensive missile systems instead of supersonic fighter jets. Finally, in 1959, when only 5 prototypes had been built and just one of them had flown, the Canadian government suddenly canceled the entire project and ordered that all prototypes, blueprints, documents, and even the manufacturing tools be destroyed. Interestingly, there's a well-known conspiracy theory that claims one of the prototypes of this fighter jet wasn't actually destroyed and is secretly hidden somewhere. So, even though this fighter jet never went into operation, it still remains a source of national pride for Canadians, and people still talk about it. In fact, the truly remarkable 30 F-105 was so incredibly advanced and remarkably visionary that many people still genuinely can't quite believe it was ultimately cancelled, perhaps just because of prohibitive costs or complex political considerations. Let's now move on to discuss number 4 on our comprehensive list. The AH-56 Cheyenne was a helicopter built in the 1960s that had both attack and reconnaissance capabilities. An incredibly ambitious and forward-thinking project by the US Army, which, despite being extremely advanced and fast, never entered service. The AH-56 Cheyenne was an attack helicopter, and in fact a hybrid between an airplane and a helicopter, with a speed of about 405 kilometers per hour or 290 knots. That's a speed that's really fast for a helicopter. This beast had a turboshaft engine with about 3,900 horsepower, and of course a propeller at the tail to generate forward thrust. The armaments of these helicopters included an automatic cannon, guided missiles, rockets, and many other things. Additionally, the gunner's rotating seat allowed the gunner to turn inside the cockpit and change the firing angle. But what happened that this Superman of helicopters never became operational? The first reason was an accident during a test flight. In 1969, one of the prototypes crashed and the pilot was killed. This incident dealt a major shock to the project. Additionally, this helicopter turned out to be very expensive and its maintenance was complicated. On the other hand, the US Air Force said that since this helicopter had become too much like an airplane, the project conflicted with the Key West Agreement, which prohibited the Army from building attack aircraft. Eventually, in the 1970s, a project called the Advanced Attack Helicopter was launched, which led to the creation of the H-64 Apache, a helicopter that was simpler, lighter, more reliable, and more successful than the AH-56 Cheyenne. But in my opinion, the main reason for this helicopter's failure was that, from an engineering standpoint, it was probably way ahead of its time, while the military back then was looking for a quick and reliable solution and didn't favor too many strange and expensive innovations. Let's take this opportunity to get to know another helicopter as well. A light reconnaissance and attack helicopter called the RAH-66 Comanche. This helicopter was supposed to be the future of reconnaissance helicopters, featuring remarkable stealth, advanced electro-optical and infrared sensors, the ability to penetrate enemy lines, locate targets, deliver precise strikes, and controlled heat output, meaning the hot exhaust gases would pass through special channels to prevent detection by heat-seeking missiles. The maximum speed of this helicopter was also around 320 kilometers per hour, which is about the same as the Apache. And an interesting point about the RH-66 was that its weapons were hidden inside internal bays and only came out when it was time to fire, just like fifth-generation fighter jets. But what caused the whole project to be scrapped after spending a modest $7 billion? The answer is simple: the staggering cost. By 2004, more than $7 billion had been spent, and this helicopter still hadn't entered service. Additionally, after the September 11th attacks, tactics changed and the military started looking for helicopters suited for irregular and urban warfare instead of covert operations. On the other hand, alternative options like drones and the upgraded AH-64 Apache could do the same jobs as the RH-66 Comanche, but better and at a lower cost. So, in 2004, the US Department of Defense officially announced that the project would be halted, and only 2 prototypes of this helicopter were ever built, which are now on display at the US Army Museum. Well, now that we've gotten to know these non-operational aircraft, I have to say, in my opinion, the YF-23 really could have been the future of aerial warfare, but maybe its time just hadn't come yet. The other projects might have been scrapped just because of a bit of neglect or a political decision. What do you think? If only one of these aircraft were to enter service, which one do you think deserved it the most? Be sure to let me know in the comments. But these fighter jets teach us an important lesson. Sometimes the greatest inventions get sidelined, not because they were bad, but because politics, fear, or other priorities and changing tactics didn't let them grow. The world of technology and warfare is full of stories, and I want to say that this video has a part 2, where we'll look at fighter jets that even broke world records but still couldn't find a place in the skies or the real world. If you want to find out why a fighter jet that could fly at Mach 3 was still retired, make sure to watch the next video, because the story gets even more exciting from here.